In this lesson, we will learn how to clean up transforms on a cat rig. A rig isn't quite ready for animation, not just yet, and that's simply because of our bone objects not being zeroed out. So quite frankly, it'd be a mess if we had to polish animation in Max's curve editor because of that fact. So we'll learn how to zero our values out, but before that, I'd like to point out that this would be a great time to use the cat motion system to create an auto cycle if you plan on taking that step. Simply because of the current offset values here speaking well to cat motion, we're going to get a really nice walk, and I'll show you that. If we were to head over to our motion panel, I'll go ahead and add a cat motion layer. Enter animation mode, hit play. You can see that walk looks really neat. But once we start to zero out our values, you can imagine that there's going to be an undesirable offset. Things aren't going to move in place as they are currently. Alright, so that's just something to keep in mind. And we will be dedicating more time to cat motion so we can take a look at some really neat features it offers. But for right now, let's go ahead and get rid of our cat motion layer. You can see that that automatically moves us back to setup mode. And we can go ahead and start to take a look at the current values of our controls. So we'll go ahead and work with the head control just to make a point very clear. I'm going to go ahead and head over to our curve editor. And what you'll see is that we don't quite have access to our transform controllers. Where's our position and rotation list? Well, if you would like to have access to them in setup mode, you'd head over to your hierarchy panel, and underneath link info, you'll find an option underneath setup mode. Two options here. We have static matrix, which is the static pose of our rig. This is what we always come back to when we enter into setup mode. And then we have animation controller mode. Either way, we're still in setup mode. We always get back to this pose, but keep an eye on the curve editor. What you'll see is that when we use the animation controller mode, we then have access to those tracks. And it's only to keep an eye on the current transforms of each of these controllers. So this is not a way to animate in setup mode. Alright, so with that said, I tend to just keep this set to default, static matrix mode. And keep in mind that once we add an animation layer, we're then given access to those same controllers. Alright, so that's nothing to worry about. But what we do need to worry about is making sure that all of our bones and such are zeroed out. So in order to do that, it's going to be under the same tab here, link info. If we were to scroll down underneath the animation mode, what you'll find is additive to setup pose. Now I'd like to point out that this is best to use when in setup mode and before you've made an animation layer. It's kind of like what we've already explained. When we make a drastic change to our rig, it's a good idea to create a brand new layer to have a fresh, clean start. So this rule applies here as well. But now, if we were to go ahead and use this, what we'll notice is that when we create a layer, let's just go ahead and make that an absolute one and enter into animation mode. When we create this, we'll notice now that our values are zeroed. Very neat. Now you may find that when you use this option, that there are some things that get offset when you add an animation layer. And that happens at times. I mean, we're trying to match this cat rig to our character that may be very stylized, and because of that we have to add some extra rotation to get everything matched well. And because of that, well, then that may cause an undesirable offset when we move to animation mode, but it's very simple to tweak. It's just a matter of going to a track with a 0 value, copying it, and then you can go to the track that needs work, that is offset, right click and choose paste, and then use that that default option, copy here at the top. We'll choose OK, and now that track will have a 0 value. So you may notice that this happens to your head rig or to your feet. Let's go ahead and get rid of the animation layer here. I'm going to go ahead and now use additive to setup pose on the creature's ankle. Head over back to the motion layer, add an absolute layer, and then go ahead and enter into animation mode. And you'll see that offset that I was referring to. So again, really simple to fix. This may look drastic, but it's not at all. I'm going to go ahead and head over to the head control, simply because that has already been worked to work with additive to setup pose. So I'm now going to go ahead and choose copy, select the ankle, and I'll start to paste that track value in and move down our list until we've managed to zero everything out. So keep an eye on that ankle, because we'll notice that it'll look great in no time at all. It's going to go right back to the position it needs to be at. So just 2 more tracks here. 1 more. The Z-axis is the main culprit, but watch, once we choose OK, everything pops back to normal. Alright, so again, that's just something to keep in mind. That happens at times when working with CAT, but it's very simple to fix. Alright, great. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about additive to setup pose, what it actually does. Basically makes this pose here work relative to our animation layers. So that means is that once we create an animation layer, it considers this a relative position, so that when it looks at each of our bone values, it's actually a 0 value that it captures. So that's all it really does. And what's great is that we can go through and apply it to just one side of our creature here and mirror those changes across to save time. So if we were to go in and, let's say, do this for the creature's leg, I'm going to go ahead and trash this animation layer. Head over to the hierarchy panel and use additive to setup pose. I'll use it here on the thigh. I'll use that for the segmented shin. And what's really neat about this also is that all of these pieces are connected. So when we apply it to one, it actually gets applied to all in that set. Alright, so I'll make sure it's added there. We've already taken care of the ankle. I'll go in and make sure that we've done the same for the toes. And let's go ahead and take care of the last toe here. Great. You could do the same thing for the hand. Just go in, add it to setup pose. Do the same thing for the forearm. Remember, they're all linked, so we just need to worry about one bone. And you'd want to do the same thing for your fingers too. I'll go ahead and take care of the fingers here. And then I'll actually pause the video to take care of the others. I'll just work on this thumb, simply because we're applying that same option to the rest of these. And then when I come back, we'll go ahead and mirror all of these changes across. Okay, so I've managed to use this option for the entire left half. So now, if we'd like to transfer this to the right side, we'd head over to our Modify panel, go ahead and choose Copy. I'll grab the root of the arm chain here, the clavicle, and choose Paste Mirror. And you'll notice that these objects also now have additive to setup pose applied. It's down the entire chain. Great, so that saves us some time. We'd want to do the same thing for the leg. Just go ahead and grab the thigh, head over to the Modify panel. If you go to your object mode and you can't access any of those properties, well, we know how to fix that. I'll just go ahead and trash the Edit Poly modifier. I'll go ahead and copy the values here. And I'll select the right thigh just to add the Edit Poly back to the left. Going back to the object here on the right side, you can see that we don't have access to those values. We could always use custom mesh to fix that, but a fast way is to go ahead and just trash the modifier, go ahead and paste those changes. Let's take a look under our hierarchy panel. You can see, all right, everything has been set up properly. So once we've checked that, we can then go ahead and add the edit poly back to the thigh. All right, beautiful. Now, again, we'd want to use this option for basically all bones that will receive animation. And there is an exception. And that would be our procedural spline. So once it's in IK mode or procedural mode, you'll notice that we do not have access to that option. But once we switch this to FK mode, now, if we were to go back and take a look, we can use this. We can go ahead and zero out that spine. All right, so that's just something that we want to keep in mind when working with CatReg, that our vertebrae, if it's in IK mode, don't have to worry about additive to setup pose at all. All right, great. So we have learned how to zero out our values. Remember to keep in mind that with cat motion, it's not going to work too well when we go ahead and use cat motion after this has been added. And I'll go ahead and show you this before we end this lesson. Going back to the motion panel, if I were to just go in and add a cat motion layer to this, enter animation mode, it's not going to walk ideally. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and now remove that layer so we can go back to setup pose. And that's going to be it for this discussion. So in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and add our absolute IK controls. And then following that, we can move right into skinning.